Hi, I'm Mel Van Duzen. I'm going to be the moderator for this discussion. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most controversial propositions on the November ballot. It's Proposition 19, the marijuana proposition. And I had a setup all arranged for this until I became aware of some breaking news. It appears that this morning U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder said that the federal government would crack down on Proposition 19 if it passes. So this, I guess, gives us something to begin with. Our guests today are Chief Joseph McNamara, and he is a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University and a former police chief of San Jose and Kansas City. He's for the measure. And against the measure is Chief Pete Dunbar, who is currently the chief of police in Pleasant Hill. So thank you both for being here. So the Eric Holder announcement that the federal government will crack down on Proposition 19 if it passes. Chief McNamara, you won the coin toss, so I'll let you have first crack at this. What do you have to say about it?
Well, I think Mr. Holder would do well to remember the words of Abraham Lincoln. We're a government of the people, for the people, and by the people. We're not a government of Washington to dictate how the California voters should vote. And for him to come into this state a couple of weeks before the election to make this statement is a pretty blatant attempt to influence the California voters. The polls show that Proposition 19, the yes vote, is slightly ahead at this point in time. And for the Attorney General of the United States to come here and to try to intimidate the voters and to push his viewpoint, I think displays a kind of arrogance of the federal government that has a lot of people upset in this country.
Okay, and Chief Dunbar, how do you respond to Eric Holder's comments?
Well, I've said for all along that this is a violation of federal law, that this proposition violates federal law because Controlled Substances Act says marijuana possession is illegal. And he's just coming out and saying, you know, medicinal marijuana, okay, we really haven't done much with that, but now we're drawing the line. And anything beyond that is really going to endanger our ability to enforce drug trafficking throughout the United States. It could increase violence in Mexico, as bad as it is there. So it just really hones and finds a point that we've been saying, that it's a violation of federal law, it's a bad idea, and him coming out and saying it, yeah, I wish he would have come out earlier and say it, but the fact that he said it, I think, is reassuring to all of us in public safety.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Now I'd like to just read briefly a summary of the Proposition 19. It legalizes marijuana under California law, but not federal law. It permits local governments to regulate and tax commercial production, distribution, and sale of marijuana. And then it makes 5 points. 1, allows people 21 years old and older to possess, cultivate, or transport marijuana for personal use. Permits local governments to regulate and tax commercial production, distribution, and sale of marijuana to people 21 years old and older. Other point, prohibits people from possessing marijuana on school grounds, using it in public, or smoking it while minors are present. It maintains prohibitions against driving while impaired. And finally, it limits employers' ability to address marijuana use to situations where job performance is actually impaired. So we can start now with what I originally had in mind. Both of you are passionate about Proposition 19, and I would like to hear from you what your stand is and why it is so important to you. So you won the coin toss, Mr. McNamara, so you have about 2 minutes.
Well, I think we should be honest. The war against marijuana that's been going on for almost 100 years in California, strictly enforced by local government and by the federal government, has failed. Anyone that wants marijuana in California can get it and use it. All we've done is create a tremendous criminal black market which provides this drug to somewhere between 4 million and 12 million people in California. And with that kind of demand, someone is going to satisfy it. In the process of enforcing the law, we have created the kind of violence that surrounds the black market. Mexico is a terrible example, with some 28,000 people murdered, mayors, generals, police chiefs, innocent citizens. And that's what prohibition does. So the real harm of marijuana doesn't come from the marijuana itself. It comes from the fact that marijuana is against the law and that we create this criminal black market which is going on. No matter what we may think about people using marijuana or not using it, they're going to use it. We have to face up to that, and we have to direct the police resources to be used where the people want them to be used, against violent crime, dangerous crimes that endanger them and their family. No one is really terrified about people smoking pot in their neighborhood, but I can tell you, I went to a lot of neighborhood meetings as police chief, and people are legitimately scared about crime in their neighborhoods, and that's where they want the police to concentrate, not on trying to stop people from smoking marijuana.
Mm-hmm. And Chief Dunbar, what is your stand on it and why it is so important to you?
Oh, I'm opposed to it. And I do agree with Chief McNamara that I think our drug war has failed. But legalizing drugs is not, to me, the way to win the drug war. That takes a separate approach. But specifically with Prop 19, it's a flawed piece of legislation that really doesn't legalize marijuana, but what it does is erodes public safety. Just think about having your kids or grandkids going to school with a bus driver that reported to work after having smoked some marijuana or chose to smoke some marijuana at lunch or after work, yet comes to work with this marijuana in their system. Forklift operator who's moving machinery near a school. These kind of things could happen if Prop 19 passes. I think there'll be more people consuming marijuana. There's no doubt about it. RAND Corporation, which is a non-partisan research company, has said two things are for sure. Marijuana consumption will go up and price will go down. More people will be using it. More people will be under the influence. More people will then be driving under the influence. That doesn't help us in public safety at all. It's difficult enough to go after those people who are under the influence of alcohol. Now adding people under the influence of marijuana, we don't have enough resources for it. This proposition doesn't regulate marijuana. What it does is it relieves up to over 500 different law enforcement entities and city and county entities to decide individually if they want to opt in. If they choose to opt in, then they get to choose how they are going to tax and regulate it. Most agencies will not opt in based on my understanding. Some will because they want to make money. Mm-hmm. But this is going to actually have a very patchwork regulation. Tom Miamiano sees that and is bringing legislation forth to give this regulation to the state, which they are underfunded in the first place, ABC, Alcohol Beverage Control. That's who he wants to have do this if this passes. There's a whole host of problems. There's, I think, really a lot of desperation on the proponent's part to show that police resources would be redirected. That's not going to happen. It's really just a flawed piece of legislation that erodes public safety.
Okay, thank you. Many people watching have probably read the issues, and they may have really made up their minds on this and maybe watching just out of curiosity. But maybe what many people don't know is that Governor Schwarzenegger, who opposes Proposition 19, signed a bill early this month, about 2 weeks ago, that reduces possession of small amounts of marijuana from a misdemeanor to an infraction, the same level as for those caught speeding on the freeway. And my question is, how has the governor's recent action affected this debate? And what does his action say about the laws regarding marijuana? So, Chief McNamara? Well,
the governor said that if Californians pass Proposition 19, we'll be the laughing stock of the country. And with all due respect, I have to say, Governor, we are the laughing stock of the company. Mm-hmm. You have presided over a $19 billion deficit in time of recession, which means that all the police and all the criminal justice agencies have to save on resources. So I think his bill that he's bragging about, which was, by the way, opposed by the California police chiefs, is worse than nothing. It preserves the black market, and it just keeps the same obligations on the police. They'll have to preserve the chain of evidence, seize the evidence, and keep it in lockers in police custody with all of the dangers of it being stolen, which seems to occur just about everywhere. So my friend and opponent here, Pete, has mentioned the drug war has been a failure. But essentially, he's asking people to vote no on Election Day on Prop 19, which means you're voting to continue a drug war that has been a failure and to do more and more of what has not worked in the past. Proposition 19 offers the taxpayers an alternative. Regulate, control, and tax marijuana. There's no reason that $14 to $16 billion illegal industry of marijuana in this state should escape taxation simply because it's illegal. The rest of us pay taxes. Why shouldn't they? And I think the public polls showing the voters are inclined to pass Prop 19 have scared the governor, scared the attorney general, scared the professional politicians, and that's why we see this last-minute effort by the establishment people to try to intimidate the voters of California.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to work.
Okay. Chief Dunbar, how do you respond to the fact the governor reduced marijuana possession from a misdemeanor to an infraction?
You know, possession of an ounce of marijuana, less than an ounce of marijuana, has been a low priority for law enforcement. We have this prioritized our resources for a number of years, and this just hasn't hit our radar screen as being one of the big things to do. So it just really kind of codifies what we've been doing. There have been 60 to 70,000 arrests of possession of an ounce of marijuana last year. Most of those people were getting a traffic ticket, a short report was done, and the evidence was collected. Now they're going to just get a ticket. There's not going to be a report. What it does, it just shows people in California that possession of less than an ounce of marijuana has been decriminalized come January 1st. It is not going to be a big deal. Police resources will not be put toward it. They haven't been put toward that in the first place. But what it also does, is I think it throws a dagger at the Prop 19 proponents, would say that you have to redirect police sources and millions of dollars can be redirected towards violent crime and other things. Well, that isn't going to happen. It hasn't been happening, and I think the governor signing SB 1449 just again codifies that.
Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, opposes Proposition 19 because, to paraphrase, bus and trucking companies won't be able to take action against stoned drivers until after he or she has a wreck, not before. And the California Police Chiefs Association opposes Proposition 19 because proponents forgot to include a standard for what constitutes driving under the influence. Under Proposition 19, a driver may legally drive even if blood tests show that he has marijuana in his system. So how would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, the arrests for marijuana are not just a traffic ticket. They are conviction of a violation of law that has tremendous penalties. Someone convicted of possession of marijuana would lose their college funding, would suffer employment difficulties, and someone convicted of rape in California would not lose their college funding. So to say it's the same as a traffic ticket is not correct. In fact, people can be sentenced to mandatory treatment programs, and they have a stigma for the rest of their life in some cases. Now, the Mothers Against Drunk Driving understandably have an emotional issue in this. There's nothing worse for a parent than losing a child because of someone's drunk driving. Proposition 19 does not affect the current laws against drunk driving. In fact, Proposition 19, if it passes, will give the police more resources, more incentive to act against driving while impaired for both alcohol, marijuana, and other drugs. Okay. So that's, I think, a non-argument in this case.
Okay, and how would you respond to that?
Like I just said, we've redirected resources. We're going after felony violators, including those that sell, traffic, and cultivate marijuana, which is a felony. I agree that I think as I said before, consumption will increase. More people will be driving under the influence, and there really isn't a medical standard that was even devised in this proposition to help us. Sure, we can do a field sobriety test, and if we think a person's impaired, then we can go ahead and arrest them, but there's no court standard that says automatically, like a blood alcohol content of 0.08, says automatically that person's under the influence. Now we just don't know.
I think, so there are blood tests to determine if someone has been smoking, but they can't determine when. Is that the idea?
I mean, the marijuana can stay in one system up to 30 days. Right. So you can look at content and kind of gauge, and I'm sure there's some scientific things, but that's weeks, maybe even months down the road after an arrest.
Okay. The Justice Department said that the Mexican cartels are the biggest source of illegal drugs in the U.S. My question is, do our current drug laws somehow encourage these cartels? And what effect would Proposition 19 have on these cartels? So, go ahead.
Well, Pete and other people opposed to Proposition 19 like to quote the Rand Institute. I'm a researcher full-time since I left law enforcement. I read research reports. I urge people to read the Rand reports. First of all, people arguing using the Rand reports are not being candid. The Rand reports do not take a position in favor or against Proposition 19. And Rand, in effect, says in the small print of its latest report that passage of Proposition 19, contrary to what the opponents are saying, Rand says Proposition 19, if it passes, may, in the long run, actually cause tremendous damage and eliminate the Mexican drug cartels. So it's not the advocates of 19 who have said that the cartels derive 60% of their income from marijuana black market. The White House, the Office of National Drug Control Policy said that. In other words, the same Attorney General's network that now is urging people to vote no on Proposition 19 is the one that set this estimate. And in fact, if you can deprive the cartels of a significant amount of their income, and by the same token, the California drug gangs that are creating the violence and danger in our state, then that's a very significant thing, and it's not something we should turn down.
Okay. Chief Dunbar?
Well, in that same Rand report, I've seen estimates that drug cartels could stand to lose as little as 2% revenue or as much as 20% in revenue. And if I felt that in any way we could reduce the violence associated with drug dealing of marijuana, I would be for it. After working 24 years in Oakland and seeing the violence associated with marijuana, I would certainly be in favor of something that could reduce the violence and the drug markets and the criminal street gangs that run these areas. This isn't going to do it. This won't touch it. I think what we'll even see, and now Mexico's even concerned, is if this passes, they're going to see more violence in there because, of course, people will be really strongly competing for dollars because they're seeing the price to go down.
Right. I don't know if you're aware of it, but yesterday in the Sacramento Bee, there was a quote from the Rand Corporation, and it went like this. Legalizing pot in California would reduce violence in Mexico only if California exports drive Mexican marijuana out of other states.
Well, I think the Rand analysis is questionable in a number of ways. Their research methodology is questionable, as all research is. And one has to remember that Rand says that it's a nonprofit objective organization, but they derive a lot of their research grants from the federal and local governments. And they've released 2 studies now which focus only on 2 arguments that were not the principal arguments in favor of Prop 19 a few weeks before the election, what we call an October surprise that's pretty much frowned upon in trying to change the focus of an election a few weeks before Election Day. So I'd have to question the Rand's conclusions, but also say that in the print of their research study that you just quoted, they actually say that this, in the long run, passage of Prop 19, will be a serious blow against the Mexican drug cartels. Former presidents of Mexico and army officials and police chiefs have all called for the legalization of drugs in Mexico because they're suffering the brunt of the violence because the California and American demand for these products, even though it's illegal, are what leads to the violence. People aren't violent because they've consumed marijuana. They're violent just as Al Capone and the bootleggers were during Prohibition because they're engaged in a criminal black market. That's why people are getting killed and shot. If you really want to reduce violence and protect people, the answer is quite simple. Pass Proposition 19, a yes vote on Election Day. It's just common sense. It's a win-win-win situation.
Okay. Chief Dunbar, about the Sacramento Bee's article yesterday, legalizing pot in California would reduce drug violence in Mexico only if California exports drive Mexican marijuana to other states.
Yeah, I think this is a great example of how the yes on 19 gets an F when it comes to fact check. Because the accusations and things that they've said on why people should vote yes continue to be refuted by fact and by research. Okay. And I did research a few years ago when I was in college, but right now I just kind of have boots on the field, so I can tell you what goes on in the streets.
Okay, next question. The State Board of Equalization said that legalizing marijuana could bring California as much as $1.4 billion in tax revenue, and in July, the RAND Drug Policy Research Center forecast that legalizing marijuana could send prices plunging by as much as 90%. And I'll start with you on this. I read an article on the internet quoting you. Did you say that if the price of marijuana drops, more people are going to buy it? Low-income people are going to buy marijuana instead of buying food, which happens with substance abusers. Did you say that?
I sure did, because that was my experience in Oakland, especially with heroin and crack cocaine. Those two things, people were selling stuff. They were not buying food for themselves. They were, letting themselves go hungry because they had addiction to drugs. It's a terrible experience, and I said it because I've seen it.
When you mean drugs, do you mean substances other than marijuana?
Marijuana is also addictive.
Are you talking specifically about marijuana?
Marijuana, drugs in general. Marijuana, like these other drugs, is a mind-altering drug.
We're talking about marijuana here.
Right. So marijuana is a mind-altering drug. 9% of the people that use it get addicted to it. Very small percentage, about half of what happens with cocaine and heroin. But nonetheless, people like the experience they get with it. And if the price goes down and they're able to purchase marijuana instead of purchasing food or other things that they need, my experience has been they're going to choose to purchase marijuana.
Briefly, for both of you, how do you define addiction?
Someone who can't go on a day without having marijuana in this case.
Couldn't that also be habit?
I guess that's semantics between habit and addiction.
Okay. Chief McNamara, would you respond to Chief Dunbar's quote, if the price of marijuana drops, more people are going to buy it. Low-income people are going to buy marijuana instead of buying food, which happens with substance abusers?
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think, in fact, it expresses a distrust of people that shouldn't be part of law enforcement. No one is compelled to take marijuana. It is not an addictive drug by any kind of medical standards. And in fact, that alcohol and tobacco are far more dangerous drugs and deadly drugs, but we recognize it would be sheer stupidity to make those drugs illegal because it would create a violent black market such as we had during Prohibition. So this idea that the police, the heavy hand of criminal law, should be used to establish what people should do and shouldn't do is a very dangerous and totalitarian proposition. It's none of the police business what people do in the privacy of their home, whether they use a cocktail at night to relax or they use marijuana. I don't advocate the use of marijuana. I've never used it, don't intend to, but I think it's sheer folly to people to put people in jail and make them criminals and lock them up because they don't agree with me.
Okay, you've both, I think, are aware of what your opponent has said. You're familiar with the issues here. So having become familiar with what your opponent feels, which of your opponent's arguments about Proposition 19 seem most reasonable to you? So I'd like to begin with you. Which of Chief McNamara's arguments for Proposition 19 seem most reasonable to you?
Well, I totally agree with him about the drug war. I mean, we have done this in a piecemeal way, state by state, almost county by county and city by city, and have lost a strategic approach because we have put other things in terms of drugs as a higher priority. Not that they may not be, but we haven't had a consistent approach to the drug war from all levels since I can remember. So, I mean, with that, we still have drugs in the schools. That hasn't gone away. So, he's absolutely right about that.
Okay. Chief McNamara, which of your opponent's arguments about Proposition 19 seem most reasonable to you?
What he just said.
His arguments against Proposition 19.
Yeah, I think his closing statement should have been mine. The drug war fails, and it will fail. No one argues that we're winning. No one argues that we can win. And so essentially, if you're asking people to vote no on election day on Prop 19, you're asking them to vote to continue of doing more and more of what has not worked, to continue the black market, the violence, to continue, for example, to focus on minority groups, the California NAACP and the largest Latino organization in California, the National Association of Black Police Officers, all have come out and endorsed Proposition 19 because they know this enforcement has fallen disproportionately on minorities, and that price is an enormous price to pay, which actually increases crime in California because we need the cooperation of those neighborhoods and citizens to help the police prevent other crimes.
Okay. Time has gone by really fast. We're almost at the end here. So I think we only have time for closing statements. So you have 1 minute to close your argument. What would that be? What would you have to say?
Well, I spent 35 years in law enforcement, half of it in New York City, working the highest crime areas, the highest drug areas in the city, 3 years as police chief in the Midwest in Kansas City, Missouri, and 15 years as chief in San Jose, California. And I'm convinced that the most effective way the police can fight crime is to have a partnership with the people in their community. You only get that if you earn the trust of the community, and you don't earn the trust by going wild against trying to focus on marijuana. People are concerned about crimes that endanger them and their family, and that's where they want the police to concentrate. When you are trying to control what is essentially a consensual transaction of using marijuana, you're going to overreach what the police should be doing. They should refocus on their primary duty of protecting life and property and recognize that by making marijuana illegal, we've actually increased violence and crime in our communities.
Okay, Chief Dunbar, your closing remarks?
Yeah, this isn't about the drug war or anything else. It's about Prop 19. And again, I've said Prop 19 is flawed. Prop 19 says that they're going to raise $1.4 billion, the number you just quoted. That number came from a separate piece of legislation that the legislative analysts and a number of other folks have said, we don't know how much it's going to make. The state's not going to make the money. They can tax it, but the focus is at local control. So there's no state regulation in this proposition. There's not going to be any redirection of police resources because they've already been redirected. The things that the Prop 19 people are telling you aren't true. What could happen if a Prop 19 passes is that more people will be consuming, more people driving under the influence, more problems for public safety.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank Chief McNamara for being here and Chief Dunbar. We've just scratched the surface. There are many more questions we could have asked, but I think we've touched on some interesting points. And the only other thing I have to say is to encourage the people watching to get out and vote this November. So see you at the polls. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thanks.